Hey all you people, Snakes in the Library here. You know, of all the media franchises that are essential to my life, the one that stands above all the others would be Halo. It was the first video game series I became a serious fan of, and some of my earliest memories with video games stem from playing those beloved titles, that OG Bungie trilogy everyone and their grandma loves. Needless to say, the first three Halo games are all fantastic, and it's not hard to see why they hold such a special place in the hearts of many. They revolutionized the industry, let alone the FPS genre, popularizing mechanics and features that have gone on to become staples in game design for the next 20 plus years and counting. For better or for worse, depending on who you're asking, of course. Anyway, as I was saying, Halos 1 through 3, some would even include Reach, are such high quality games that it spawned a debate over which of these games is the de facto greatest. You know you fucking cooked when the favored game varies so much between fans, and there's always a strong set of reasons to prefer one over the others. And as far as my personal tastes are concerned, Halo 2 was my favorite for the longest time and still kind of is. It's always had my favorite soundtrack, story, multiplayer, etc. But as I grew older, the more appreciation I had garnered for the title that started the whole shebang, Combat Evolved. And I don't think it's very difficult to understand why that is. It's a much more subtle, more atmospheric game than the rest, and the age and process, as we all know, allow us to appreciate those sorts of things. Halo 2 and 3 has more in the way of set pieces, like big explosions, rousing moments of triumph, characters dying, that sort of thing. So naturally, kid me gravitated toward those two games. However, adult me has found himself going back to Combat Evolved more often than ever, and by now, it's gotten to the point where I'm debating whether or not this truly is Bungie's magnum opus. This is a notion I've been toying with for about a year now, and after going through the campaign once again, I really must say, it could very well be. It is an undisputed masterpiece of a video game. It goes hard, and it makes me hard. So, let's talk about the guns. So with Combat Evolved being the first game in the series, it's only natural that the amount of toys you get to play with isn't as expansive as in later titles. And while you may think this will lead to an overall weaker, less interesting gameplay loop, that actually couldn't be any farther from the truth. Honestly, I find Combat Evolved Sandbox to be among the strongest in series history, given how concise and well balanced it is. A big issue some of the later games faced was a bloated catalog of weapons, which would wind up creating a ton of overlap and even some redundancy here and there. But with a smaller, more well-rounded arsenal, Combat Evolved is able to successfully emphasize what each and every gun brings to the table. Depending on the situation, you're able to get at least some sort of mileage with each and every weapon you come across. Except for the Needler. We don't talk about that one. It is awful. The Magnum is your go-to long-range weapon. The AR is great for dealing with crowds of smaller foes. The Plasma Rifle quickly breaks down energy shields, while the Plasma Pistol can be charged to evaporate shields in a single shot. And by now, I think we've all fiddled around with the Magnum Plasma Pistol combo, and yeah, it's just as satisfying as it was over 20 years ago. Did I mention that the Needler sucks ass yet? It's honestly impressive how dynamic this set of weapons is, again, despite being by far the smallest in the series. There's so many layers to peel back as far as usefulness goes, as far as drawbacks go, as far as weapon properties go, it's insane. That world-famous new combo I just mentioned is but one of several ways that make this sandbox as dynamic and complex as it is. And if I were to sum up this game's sandbox in a single word, it would be precisely that one: dynamic. After all, the whole gameplay loop of the game is centered around the fact that you can only use two weapons at a time, and what this limitation does is force the player to assess how those two weapons complement each other given the situation you're currently facing. How are they gonna fare against these squads of enemies? How are they gonna help you save ammo, that sort of thing. One thing I like to highlight when it comes to these weapon dynamics is the relationship between Covenant and human weapons. The former is focused on depleting shields, while the latter's strong suit is dealing damage. This is why the aforementioned nuke combo has become so widely regarded as a viable strat, because it's such a quick way to get a kill. But don't fool yourself into thinking this is the de facto strat that you should use the whole way through, because the interesting thing to consider here are the drawbacks that come with this strat. After all, in order to actually charge your shot, you'll need to expend a solid chunk of the weapon's energy count, and of course, this is all assuming you even hit the damn target. And if you're in a wide open area, it certainly becomes more difficult to do so. This is precisely where the plasma rifle comes in handy, a weapon that has similar mechanics, whose higher rate of fire makes it a more effective option in mid-range encounters. And the sort of dichotomy is exactly what makes Combat Evolved's Sandbox so interesting and fun to play around with. Because it's so small, yet there's so many variables to consider that it opens up all this room for strategy and improvisation. You're constantly assessing what one weapon can do versus what the other weapon can't do, and you're trying to create this whole balancing act of the mechanics, of the drawbacks, of the risk-reward factors and all that shit. And you're taking all this into consideration. It's great, man. But a good selection of guns is one thing, and obviously, a good shooter can't scrape by on a strong sandbox alone. Which brings me to discuss the real meat of Combat Evolved, the absolute crown and achievement of this game's design, and that would be the enemy AI, or just the enemy design in general. I think it should go without saying that a good sandbox must be complemented by a good selection of enemies to fight. Enemies that strongly encourage a use of these different weapons. Nobody likes the homogeneous combat system, and thankfully, Combat Evolved is able to avoid these pitfalls with flying colors. Every enemy class lend themselves to a variety of different strategies in dealing with them, some of which I've already mentioned, but there's plenty of somewhat niche ways to engage with them as well. One of my favorite examples relate to the Jackal class, an enemy who keeps its bitch ass tucked safely behind a shield. However, even with their shield up, they still leave their feet and right hand exposed, and assuming you trust your aim enough, you can kill them as easy as a single magnum shot and a melee. It's a pretty great strat to use if you're looking to save up ammunition, but that's just one example of how much subtlety there is to the enemy design and the impact they can have on playstyle, short term and even long term at times. And to further elaborate on that point, we have to examine the way enemies actually behave, the way they adapt to their surroundings, the way they can influence how you play the game. I've gushed over the game's enemy AI numerous times, as have many others, and that's because Combat Evolved quite simply has some of the strongest programming I have ever seen. We also have to consider that, just like the Sandbox, the number of unique enemy types there are is actually quite small. You have your grunts, jackals, elites, and flood and sentinels in later missions. Some enemies will have different classes, for instance zealots or carriers, but all things considered, there isn't a whole lot of enemy variety. And while that would normally be seen as a flaw, it's here where the motto of less is more shines once again. This game has the amount of assets to fill a baby's fists, and yet the gameplay is so consistently engaging throughout. It's like if you put Gordon Ramsay into a room with nothing but crayfish and a bucket of zucchinis, he's gonna make some fine ass cuisine out of that, no matter how small the amounts of ingredients are. Kinda like what the developers did here with this small chunk of assets. Halo Combat Evolved is a champion of doing the absolute most with the absolute least, and I think the enemy design is more emblematic of this philosophy than the Sandbox. The way they adapt to just about anything that happens to them feels entirely natural, and you can see it in the way they constantly shift formations. You can see it in the way they essentially communicate with their allies. You can see it in the varying levels of aggression they display, depending on various factors, including but not limited to how much health they have, how much health you have, the enemy composition, the surroundings, so on and so forth. And about how they affect the way you play the game, short term or long term or whatever. The thing about Halo Combat Evolved, more so than later entries in the series, is that it feels the most focused on its survival elements. It's the one that has its survival elements stressed the most, because most of these missions are taking place with Master Chief alone, all by his lonesome with his fat ass and his fat suit of green armor. and all he's got is just the 2 weapons he's carrying and the loot he got from corpses that he's created. And that's all you get, man. That's all you're getting, baby. So you gotta like really assess like how the enemies are behaving, how the enemies are composed, and of course how they're composed in these environments. All of these various factors, all these variables, all this shit. You have to like think about and strategize. You have to think about all of it, so you can try and assess and like come up with ways to save your ammo and save your resources and all that shit like that. And of course, like, because of all this and because of the enemy AI and all that stuff, like, something as simple as a single shot can completely change the trajectory of how the rest of the fight goes, and sometimes even how the rest of the mission goes, because for, like, some of your better weapons like the Magnum, you're not going to find it, like, all the time. You kind of got to, like, spare it a little bit. Even a single shot missed is important, can be considered crucial. So, yeah, that I went off the cuff there. I went completely off script there. Sorry. For a game from 2001, this level of flexibility in an AI is beyond impressive. I don't know the technicalities of this shit. What I do know is that the AI programming is beyond impeccable. It's pretty remarkable, I think. And now that we've made it very clear about how enemy behavior can influence the way you play the game, why don't we take a look at how they actually do behave? Why don't we look at some examples? Perhaps the most common pattern of behavior players will notice involves the elites and the grunts. You'll often see the big daddy elites send those little goblin babies to their demise, and this indeed poses a few strategies for the player to take. Lay waste to those little shits and force the elites to play more conservatively, or kill that slack-jawed fuck and watch his minions scurry. Because what's a group of subordinate losers supposed to do without their leader? That's right, nothing. Furthermore, your surroundings can often dictate how the AI will react to your rampages. Let's assume you're in an area with more cover and you've wasted all the grunts before you, forcing the elites to play defense. You'll see them zip around cover spots in an attempt to flank the player and force them into a more vulnerable position, where they'll then turn up the aggression on your ass, which can very quickly transform a fight where you were once kicking ass into one where you're now sucking ass. Amazing. I also love how the Flood are a complete 180 in terms of design complexity. They're not going to compose themselves the same way Covenant do. No, they're going to keep applying pressure because that's all these blood-sucking extraterrestrial parasites know. Although, having said that, I do like how the carriers will sometimes like sneak themselves into the corner and catch the player off guard and like blow them up when they're not even expecting it. That's pretty cool. That's pretty cool to deal with. Getting back on track, you could make the argument that subsequent titles are just as intricate, if not more so, but I don't know, man. With everything I just said, I have to say that this game has the most compelling gameplay loop of the entire franchise, man. It's just too good, man. Fighting in this game is always a good-ass time. The enemies are reactionary in ways that feel completely organic, and the weapons you use can take advantage of any given scenario, assuming you have the proper skill level. It's a gameplay loop that I've never grown tired of, and probably never will. Billion hours of gameplay be damned. For convenience's sake, I recorded the footage for this video on heroic difficulty. But my recommendation, and I cannot stress this enough, is to play this game on Legendary. Not on a first playthrough, no, on subsequent playthroughs, to where if you really want to see what this game is capable of. But let me just tell you that it is brutal. However, it is a fair type of brutal, and you'll definitely come out feeling satisfied. Getting your own ass handed to you on a silver platter will never feel better, I can assure you. Regarding the general design of the game, I think I've covered just about everything I wanted to, without delving too deep into specifics. I could have easily listed a ton more examples of combat stuff that I like, such as using the grenades to bait enemies into dodging, and therefore making them a more vulnerable target, or how killing one elite out of a pair will send the other into a vengeful fit of rage. Fuck, this game has so many neat little quirks. But I don't want this video to be super long. I don't need it to be an hour long like my FF vids. So instead, I want to make a mention of a few other gameplay related things that I think stand out. And out of the many standout things I've yet to mention, I think it'd be fair to address something about this game that I don't like. It's actually not the level design, because I think that shit is hot, and I will explain why in a moment. No, the thing I'm actually referring to is the vehicles. The way the control isn't very ideal. Matter of fact, the Warthog and especially the Ghost feel incredibly slippery, have a wonky collision system, and the amount of drift you sometimes get can be pretty annoying to deal with. But having said all that, you can get used to the way they control fairly quickly, and hell, I'd even say their obtuse physics carry a certain charm. However, my main issue regarding vehicles stem from a very particular vehicle. One that is a feared powerhouse of chaos in subsequent games, but an absolute joke in its first incarnation. I am, of course, talking about the Scorpion. You can make the skill issue argument all you want, but goddamn does this thing's missile trajectory feel completely inaccurate to where you're actually aiming. You could spend a good minute lining up your shot and still somehow miss. My target is perfectly in line with the markers, goddammit. It's right between the arrows, goddammit. And yet I still missed the shot? What, because I was on a little slope? Because the pebble was in the shot's direction? Okay, so what? Even the most minuscule bits of geometry can affect your shot, and at that point, you're better off not using the Scorpion at all. After that one section on assaults in the control room, I stopped using it myself. It sucks ass, I do not like it, it's not very good, I think. One thing I do like and think is very good, however, are the designs of the Covenant weapons. What makes them stand out to me here more so than in the following titles is just how large and bulky they are. I don't know about you, but Combat Evolved feels like the one entry in this franchise where the alien technology actually looks and feels alien. Look at the way Master Chief has to literally swing the plasma rifle as if it were some gigantic hammer. I love this shit. Using both visual designs and animations in tandem to communicate some sort of narrative idea. It fucking rocks my socks off, and Combat Evolved does stuff like this quite a lot, more so than what people typically think. And in order to truly articulate what it is that makes Combat Evolved's visual storytelling so compelling, we unfortunately have to revisit the dreaded L word, level design, hyphenated. Now, on the surface, Halo Combat Evolved's story isn't anything too out of the ordinary for your average sci-fi romp. You find an ancient weapon designed to destroy the universe, and it's up to you to take care of it. Easy. Boom, done. However, the game goes above and beyond in using various elements to enhance the overall narrative, transforming a simplistic premise into something that is deep, compelling, but also deeply terrifying at points. And one of those elements in question is level design. Pretty incredible how I've gone 2 reviews in a row where I have to defend a game with controversial level designs and explain how they influence the story. Funny. So as I was saying, the best example of this sort of visual storytelling is with the missions Assault on the Control Room and 2 Betrayals. You know, the 2 missions infamous for having quote-unquote copy and paste hallways, whatever. You see, what the game does with these 2 missions is actually quite interesting, because you're essentially playing the same mission twice, but backwards. You're retracing your steps, albeit with an entirely different goal in mind, with an entirely different tone being carried. What was once a story about finding this secret weapon and giving humans the edge in this conflict, quickly became a story about an intergalactic massacre that you desperately had to prevent. And through this method of level design, the game is able to brilliantly capture not only the urgency of the situation, but also the sheer might and terror of the Flood. You're traveling through familiar locations, but what was once mysterious is now utterly skin-crawling, because you're now going through these same areas with the newfound knowledge of what this facility's whole purpose is. Because you're going through them in the middle of a flood, so to speak. It's kind of like the level design is accommodating the structure of the narrative and the themes, and it's fantastic. But all this visual storytelling, all this narrative juicy goodness, comes to a head in the 6th mission, 343 Guilty Spark, which is a mission that I personally consider to be the greatest in series history, all things considered, So, let's break it down. On the dance floor. So obviously an enemy as terrifying and as powerful as the Flood need a proper introduction. Something that'll really sell the player on their formidable nature. And the game spends that entire 6th mission building up to this big reveal, and I'm not even kidding when I say this, but it's one of the most brilliant reveals to basically anything I have ever seen. It's an incredible mission from a narrative standpoint, and I will now explain why it is I feel that way. So when the mission starts, already there's a sense of unease lingering in the atmosphere. You're transported to this weird jungle-like biome with subtle eerie music droning in the background. What's more is that this is the first mission where Cortana isn't guiding you, so you're left all alone on this one. All alone by yourself. In an unfamiliar landscape, with nothing to work off of but an ambiguous warning from both Cortana and the mission synopsis. What the fuck were they talking about? I don't know. Let's see what this is about. Now, here's an interesting detail that I haven't seen many people point out. Throughout the entire mission, you do not fight a single elite. The only Covenant patrolling the area are erratically behaving grunts and jackals. This is interesting because what this essentially means is that the elites have gone missing, searching for whatever it is lurking inside of this facility. And after going several hours with no reports, the little guys are justifiably put on edge. Which, with all this in mind, I think we can all assume what happened to the elites in question. Their fate is obvious. Continuing onward, you eventually find a lone marine, the only marine you actually find, and he's shooting at you. He's shooting at Master Chief, screaming about some, "Don't turn me into this" or something. What the fuck is going on, man? But then, as the tension continues to build and build and build, you eventually stumble across a marine corpse who were left behind a recording that details what exactly happened to this place. And of course, you get a rundown of what exactly happened. You get to see how exactly that marine ended up that way, how both of them did. And then as soon as the log ends, we see Master Chief acting afraid. Like the way he chucks that video log at the ground, you know something's coming, and then yeah, space exterminator time, bitch. Fucking awesome, man. This moment still gives me chills, and I had to have finished this campaign at least a dozen times by now, if not more. When looking at the story in a vacuum, Halo Combat Evolved might not seem like much. Hell, some have argued that the story is boring. I once argued that myself. But when you start to dig deeper into some of the more subtle aspects it offers, you'll see that there's some pretty ingenious moments of storytelling here. And I just love how the gameplay was able to help push the narrative forward rather than detracting from it. It really does a spectacular job in putting you in the shoes of the Mr. Chief. It's also a master in tone building, in world building, in lore establishing, all that good stuff. Is it as emotionally gripping as some of the later entries? Not quite. But as far as this marriage between sci-fi and horror, between gameplay and storytelling, etc. goes, Combat Evolved hasn't been topped, not by any game in this franchise at least. As an aside, I really enjoyed the way Master Chief was characterized in this one. He's like a big kid in an even bigger suit of armor, and Cortana is like his authoritarian big sister or something. I especially like this scene that I will play right now.
Oh, those Covenant fools. They must have known. There must have been signs.
Slow down. You're losing me.
The Covenant found something. Buried in this ring. Something horrible. And now they're afraid.
Something buried? Where?
The captain. We've got to stop the captain.
Keys?
Keys? Keys? Keys? Thank you for that epic line reading, Steve Downs. Very good. All in all, Halo Combat Evolved is a game not to be fucked with. Hell, most games can't even dream of fucking with this shit. Not even close. While I don't think this is among the greatest video games I've ever played, I'd certainly say it's up there. It's gotta be in my top 25, at the very least. And it goes far beyond historical significance too. This game is legitimately well designed, and it very much holds up to this day. The sandbox is small but dynamic, with each weapon offering their own little niches. The enemy AI is far too intelligent for its own good, and will react to situations in a completely lifelike manner. And combining these two elements with more elements of survival, where strategic improvisation is heavily incentivized, it makes for a fantastic gameplay experience that never gets old, especially on Legendary. And the story offers much more depth than what many are willing to give it credit for. It's this enthralling sci-fi horror story with incredible, deep, rich lore, where the gameplay lends a significant hand in immersing the player into its world and its lore and the stakes that its world faces. Yeah, at this point, with all this being said, I have to reiterate the question of whether or not this one truly takes the Halo cake. I genuinely cannot think of many things it does that I outright dislike. Nothing significant at least. You could argue things like the imperfect spawn system on multiplayer, or yes, some hiccups here and there with the enemy AI. I will say that, at times, they can just kind of stand there and just take what you throw at them, like a man or something. I have to mention this. I cannot stand the way the anniversary graphics look, man. They just look like horseshit. They're so buttery smooth and clean and pristine and just completely sanitized. I hate this overly glitzy, glamorous, sugary sweet, overly designed. It's overly designed. Like, holy hell, this is overly designed. Like, Comet Evolved's art style is, like, pretty subtle. And, like, the anniversary graphics just, like, suck all that away. It looks like Halo Reach on a budget. It just looks like shit. Anyway, but we've heard enough about that at this point. So, whatever. Other than that, this game is really exceptional. And while I haven't come to a definitive answer to the question proposed by the title, I should soon enough. And you'll all know when that happens. I'm feeling a solid 9 on Halo Combat Evolved. See you bitches later.